Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly studios, I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of Civic Cipher, where our mission is to foster allyship, empathy, and understanding. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. I am Q Ward. You are tuned in to Civic Cipher.
Indeed you are. And listen, we know that there was an assassination attempt on the former president. We know that he has picked a VP. We know. If you want to hear our thoughts on this, our takes on it, we have done quite a number of things for the Black Information Network, and we've shared a lot on our social media. Today, however, we are going to be talking about some things that we've been wanting to get to for this show. The first one, we are going to answer the question, why are all the black kids sitting together at the lunch table? Right? We're going to have a conversation about culture, conversation about race, and a conversation about the difference and how you can find yourself welcomed at that lunch table. For the second part of the show, we are going to be talking about what it means to be blinded by privilege. This is another thing that folks have a tough time with. It's kind of like this statement, can't see the forest from the trees, you can't see the picture from inside the frame, that sort of thing. So we are going to break down those two things, especially because just in terms of conceptual topics, these are things that we've needed to get to. So my hope is that the show doesn't sound dated because, again, we've addressed some of the goings on in media, but this is something that we've needed to get to because we feel like that is more consistent with the premise of this show. Indeed. Right now. So before we get there, as always, we are going to start off with some Ebony Excellence.
Shall we?
I think we shall.
Today's Ebony Excellence is sponsored by Actively Black. There is greatness in our DNA. Visit activelyblack.com. Today's story coming from Ebony Magazine. For over 4 decades, Captain Teresa Claiborne has set out to not only rewrite the history books in the world of aviation, but to also leave a profound legacy that will serve as a blueprint for generations to come. A storied career that includes becoming the first African-American female pilot in the United States Air Force in 1982, being the first black woman to serve as a command pilot and instructor for the Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker, and the second black woman to be hired by United Airlines as a commercial pilot. Claiborne recently took her final flight as she soars into her next chapter, retirement. God bless her for that. The flight took off last week from Jersey's EWR International Airport as it headed to Lisbon, Portugal, making her final return back to New Jersey on May 23rd, 2024. Captain Claiborne recalls the emotions felt as she got into the cockpit for her last commercial flight. She said, and I quote, "Taking my final commercial flight was a bittersweet experience," she told Ebony. There was a profound sense of accomplishment and pride in having navigated a successful career, coupled with a touch of sadness knowing that a significant chapter of my life was closing. I felt immense gratitude for all people who supported me throughout my journey and for the opportunity to ensure or inspire future generations of aviators. Stories like hers are important for so many obvious reasons. Us as fathers understanding that our children need to see people in those places to know that they can and should aspire to get there one day themselves.
I love this. That's such a fantastic story. Okay. Why are all the black kids sitting together at the lunch table? And this is just how we're broaching this subject, but this could be asked a number of ways. Why are all the black kids sitting at the back of the bus laughing? Why are all the Hispanic kids congregating at the handball courts every day at lunchtime? This is like high school mentality. Or why are all the black employees, why do they all take their breaks in the parking lot at the same time every day? These sorts of things, right? And my understanding, having lived in this country, is that when a non-black person sees black people congregating, rather than seeing that as a celebration of culture, as letting their hair down in a place that's familiar around people, an audience that is familiar, it feels like that group is somehow intentionally excluding them, the observer, right? Same thing holds true with, when you're looking at Hispanic people and they're talking in Spanish or something like that. Right?
Or in more straightforward examples, HBCUs.
That's a great
Black fraternities and sororities.
Yeah,
the Fearless Fund that was set up to provide funding for minority women, entrepreneurs or founders. All of these things, Black Student Union, the NAACP, we can go on. All of these organizations created out of the necessity for there to be a safe place for excluded groups. And that we has somehow been flipped to be an exclusionary term itself, instead of the self-reaffirming inclusive we. So all those organizations that we just named, when they say we, they mean that very inclusively for people who are otherwise excluded from every other space that exists.
Sure. And I respect that for non-Black people, when you're looking at Black people congregating in the lunchroom, because that's the example that we're going to go with. Most everyone's had that experience at high school. You see all the Black kids sitting at the lunch table, and they sit there every day and they laugh, and you're not in on the joke, right? So you feel like, am I what they're laughing at? You feel like, how come I can't sit there? Why does that feel so exclusive? These people are excluding me, right? And this is a real thing. I realize that the listener might not have had that direct interpretation of your experience, but you understand that some people may have.
Well,
right?
When your lived experience has provided you with inclusion at every step, when you step into a space that seems to exclude you, you feel it in a very, very pronounced way. You're not used to walking into a space or into a room that is not curated specifically for you.
Well said. Keep going.
How dare they?
Keep going.
Is the type of feeling that I think people get. And I think we'll touch on that actually in the second segment of our show today.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to paint that picture for you because I feel like it's important to dissect this. Those small groups congregating, and they, look the same, or similar, I should say. Oftentimes, those groups are a segment of the culture that exists on a given campus or in a given environment, right? It might be work, it might be school, it might be whatever, but what you're seeing is not necessarily race, you're seeing culture, right? Culture is something that you can celebrate, and culture and race often go hand in hand because you tend to have the same culture as people who look like you. That's a tendency, but these two things are very different. And the more you come to respect and understand and maybe even celebrate a culture, that is the degree to which you might find yourself welcomed, and not because someone has to welcome you, but you generally don't feel as tense walking past the group every day, right? You might feel a little bit more welcomed in that circle, in the same way that if you learned Spanish and you overheard some people speaking Spanish, it might not feel as scary because you know what they're saying.
Indeed.
Right? You might not feel like, oh my God, are they talking about it? And if they are, you would be able to pick up on it, right? So you can read between the lines instead of just defaulting to fear and anger.
And honestly, as an English speaking American, I've had that bit of being used to walking in spaces where everybody speaks English and there's an entitlement that comes with that. And then walking into spaces where there is a group speaking the language most comfortable for them. That's the thing that I've heard Americans get mad at people speaking their native language in their presence. And I flip this scenario every time I hear it. If you were in a foreign land where your language was not the language of the native speakers and you heard someone speaking English, imagine how excited you would be.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine,
flattered, yeah.
And imagine it's someone you know.
Mm.
You guys are going to engage in a excited, exuberant conversation in your native tongue, mm-hmm. because not only is it most natural to you, but the relief, finally, I can speak freely without having to translate in my own mind this language that is not native to me.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, my children, as some of our listeners know, are Black and Mexican. Mm-hmm. My son's first language is English. My daughter's first language is Spanish.
Yeah.
So I have that dichotomy in my own home. And there are times when they have family over and I have no idea what's being said. And I've had that moment of wondering, was that conversation and that laughter all about me? Which is kind of a crazy way to process things. Mm-hmm. But it comes from then almost entitlement and being used to always being included.
Yeah.
Even in something as simple as a conversation in a language that you don't speak.
See? And I think that's really important, is because understanding where your default setting is, understanding that, did I go to fear? Did I go to concern? Is the ready assumption that they are talking bad about me, that they're laughing at me, is the ready assumption that I am somehow being intentionally excluded from this conversation? That is a great point to catch yourself and then rework your mental framework around your predicament. Because the truth of the matter is, you pointed out a great example, Q. Imagine being in another country where everyone around you is speaking, let's say Vietnam. I've been to Vietnam, mm-hmm. so I love Vietnam. It's a beautiful place.
It is a beautiful place, by the way. Whenever you want to go back, let me know, because Southeast Asia is wow.
But yeah, if I'm walking around in the mall in Vietnam, I'm hearing Vietnamese everywhere. The moment I hear English, it could be in a commercial, it can be just a conversation across the way, my ears perk up, right? And there's someone that I can talk to. And we'll learn a little bit later that language is a big part of culture, mm-hmm. right? I'm going to use a word that I don't know if this is the right way to say this, and I've had a back and forth relationship with this word, but we will say it used to be called Ebonics. More recently, it's called African American Vernacular English, AAVE. Basically, black talk. Don't ever say that. I can say that. I'm black. You don't ever say that. You can say it. I can say it. You don't say that. But that's like a language unto ourselves, right?
Yeah, there's an unfortunate thing happening with regards to quote unquote our language. It's becoming homogenized.
Yeah.
Because of the internet, because of social media, people who are not a part of the culture speak like they are. Mm-hmm. And I was listening to an article on a podcast that I listened to, shout out to Bomani Jones, where they were speaking about how once upon a time you knew where you were with the person based on that shared vernacular.
Yep.
And now a middle-aged white person might use some teenage black people vernacular because they saw it on their social media and they've co-opted it.
Yep.
And now you have no idea when speaking to someone, if you can't interact with them, that we are not the same.
In a way that's most comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? I know exactly what you mean. And I'm glad you brought that up because, the homogenization of what we would consider, like, it is a distinct language. Right now, you're hearing me speak to you in the King's English, right? This is a language that I won't say I've mastered, but I have a pretty solid command of the English language. If you heard me and Q talking with these mics off and these cameras was off and there was no lights, we sound like we're speaking the way we normally speak, right?
Q is from Detroit, Michigan. Ramses is from Compton,
California.
So
make no mistake.
You could imagine.
Yeah, and then we were using our same voices, but the words that we use, it's just a little bit more relaxed, right? And this is true when I'm around my family. This is true when I'm around people where the stakes aren't high, where there's no one to judge me. These people come from where I come from. If I ate expired oatmeal, they ate it too. You know what I mean? If I got food stamps, they got it too. There's no big eyes and little U's, right? So now we're starting to delineate culture, right? And again, being in a space with someone that you're comfortable with, where you can speak your own language, and it's a little bit easier to follow when we talk about, we're in the southwest of the United States, so we're close to Mexico down here. It's very easy for us to use Mexican people who speak Spanish as the example here, because we've grown up around, well, I've certainly grown up around Mexican people, but there's a significant population of Mexican folks in Detroit as well, and Middle Eastern people in Detroit as well. And so
one time for Southwest Detroit, one time for Dearborn, Michigan.
There you go. Yeah.
Shout out to my Chaldean friends, my Palestinian friends. There you
go. All day.
And of course, my Mexican family.
There you go. See, look, all there, right? So, how'd this come up? Well, I'm going to share a bit from you, a bit from Quora. I know, don't jump down my throat. But I just came across this, and I thought it was interesting how this came about. So I'm going to share just a bit. The question says, I saw black students sitting separately from white students in dining halls of the University of Delaware. Why was that? Do blacks feel ill at ease near whites? And there was a response from a gentleman named Brother Nkosi. Again, I don't know who this is, but I think that this gets our conversation going. So you don't have to necessarily take these words, but again, we're starting our conversation here. Brother Nkosi says, I was also visiting that day at the university, and what I noticed was that all the white kids were sitting separate and apart from the black kids. Do white kids feel ill at ease around blacks? Historically, there is a group that has told another group that they could only sit in one area of the bus, not eat in the same restaurant, use the same bathroom, etc. Do black people have a history of that? It might have been a nice gesture, considering that history, for the white kids to come over and then invite the black kids to sit with them. So obviously he's being funny and kind of turning the situation on its head. Also graciously understand if the black kids declined, because if those white kids had learned anything about black history while they were in high school, they would have come to the same conclusion that many black people have, that racial healing is a process, not an event. So to answer your question, given the historical relationship and current climate, maybe they did feel a little ill at ease. It's possible. Lastly, to be of most benefit for you, the question has to become, why did you feel the onus of mingling was on them under the circumstances? If you can be honest with yourself as to the framing of this question, you will have moved forward as a person, right? So that's a couple of ways to process a situation like that. Not mad at any of those. And again, we're providing thought experiments just so that you can, again, grow as a person, but also our hope is that we're empowering people who can empower other people.
And I love his proposition of critical thinking there. He didn't shoot this person down. Yeah. He just raised some very straightforward questions as to the reframing of the question itself, but not just the words on the paper or the words in that forum, the thoughts that led to that question. Why did your mind frame it that way? And here are some reasons.
Who's responsible for fixing it? Who's responsible for why it looks like this, and who's responsible for fixing it?
Who should actually be accountable here?
Right. And that's a great place to start, because now we're going to talk indeed about culture and race and the difference. So for us, we understand. I want to be very careful when I say this. I don't know. I'll say it this way. I don't know if in all of the years that I've been alive, if I have ever been at an event or anything like that to celebrate my race. But I have, and I know this full well, been to several events, places, etc., to celebrate my culture, right? So race and culture are two different things, right? So how about this? Culture. Culture is Black American. Race is black, okay? There are black people who are in Brazil, or black people, of course, in Africa, black people in the Middle East, black people in Southeast Asia. I have nothing in common with them. I don't speak the language. I don't know too much or nothing about what they got going on. The only thing that we have in common is the fact that we share a significant amount of melanin on our skin.
The interesting thing about race as a social construct is that it's lacking in so many ways.
Yes.
Of the connective tissue that people think they are assigning when they say all of those people are black. Denzel Washington made an example when asked about, race versus culture or color versus culture. And the example that he used was the sound of a straightening comb.
I know what it sounds
going through the hair of a child where he grew up. That is not a race thing.
It's a culture thing.
That is a culture thing.
Yeah.
And that's just one example, but I remember that sticking out to me.
That is perfect.
So poignantly, like, yo, everyone I know
knows what that sounds like,
sound and that smell.
Yes. I get my hair straightened. We did not
rehearse this conversation. However, Ramses knew exactly where it was going.
I got to get my hair straightened. My sisters take care of my hair for me. For those that have seen my face, that I have a big afro that I wear. My sisters care for my hair. My friends' moms care for my hair. You know what I mean? And this is the part of my life, and they know that smell, and I know that smell, and they know this sound. And I'm old school, so I remember the hot comb used to have to go on the stove.
You set it on the stove, on the gas stove.
There it is, yeah. So let me, obviously we're talking about our lived experience, but let me share with you some like real definitions that you can take with you. So culture, the first definition says, the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. An example is 20th century pop culture. The second definition says the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. An example is Caribbean culture, right? Now let's look at race. The first definition says, and the only one that we'll share, each of the major groupings into which humankind is considered in various theories or contexts to be divided on the basis of physical characteristics or shared ancestry, right? So, those are two different things, and what you may be seeing when you see a small group of people who all look the same sitting in the corner of the cafeteria or some equivalent in your journey is you are seeing a celebration of these people partaking in, enriching in, developing, withdrawing from, exchanging with others who share indeed their culture.
And you might even see some people that don't share physical similarities.
Yeah, absolutely.
That absolutely experience the same cultural lived experience.
So again, there's 20th century pop culture, right? So if you go to the pop club after school, you're going to see a lot of different people, right? But again, it's often easy to find folks that share your language, your upbringing, and they know the smell of a hot comb. And so don't feel off put by it. Learn and then grow.